Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special episode of Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. This is the 8th and final episode of this special series here, the Truehope Family Files, and it's been a wild and wonderful journey since part 1 of this very special series. This episode, part 8, is titled COVID, Court Corruption, and the Future for Truehope. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Truehope Family Files, an 8-part special series here on Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. Last episode was part 7, which was titled Vindication and an Upright Judge. Today is our final episode in the series, and it's part 8, COVID, Court Corruption, and the Future of Truehope. Of course, Mr. David Steffen is with me today. How are you, David?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Simon.
Awesome. I'm so excited to get into the final episode. I've had people speak to me on social media, through our website, through email, like begging when this next episode's going to come out. It's been 1 week delayed because it's a very important episode that we've really wanted to make sure we get all of the information out there, all the media, etc., and the resources and the sources to share with people. So it's certainly been a big process to get this up and running, but it's been a huge success so far. And thanks so much for everybody so far for watching. And I hope you enjoy the final episode. But we finished part 7 with you receiving a phone call from the media asking for comments on the Crown's appeal. And that came as a pretty big surprise to you.
It did. But before we go there, I want to digress for just one moment here, because there's been this delay in getting episode 8 out. And I think everybody may want to know that there's also been a bunch of stuff going on behind the scenes also that has kind of put this at delay. And so just to hold on to the end till the end of this episode, because that's where we'll actually be discussing all of this stuff that's been happening that's made life really hectic for all of us over the past couple of weeks, and what's currently going on and what's going to happen over the next month here. So wait until the end, get there so that that you know that you hear the exciting news of what's taking place across Canada here that we're going to be involved in. But anyways, yes, it was a shock. So here we are now in October of 2019. We've basically gone a month since we heard the words not guilty. And there's been a lot of rumbling. The Canadian Medical Association in their journal has published an article against us, putting that forward to their 70,000 subscribers, calling for an appeal, right? So they're getting behind this. The whole Canadian Medical Association is getting behind this. And the irony is that I was using evidence from the Canadian Medical Association to go against the doctors that were lying on stand in 2019, right? So anyways, so they were going against their own evidence that they supply in their journals. So there's all of this rumbling going on. The judge is now being called a racist. He's being strewed throughout the media. And so we're looking at this and saying there's a lot of rumblings underneath here that it would be a shock if the Crown didn't appeal. But of course, you're holding your breath saying it sure be lovely if they didn't appeal, because we've been in court now with them, at this point in time for 6 consecutive years. And this has been an ongoing issue for 7 years. And so you just really want it to be laid to rest. And so now we're getting almost to that 30-day mark where they can't appeal, because once 30 days lapses, they don't have the right to appeal after that point. Well, sure enough, we're going into Thanksgiving, October 2019. And for those that are watching in the US, that's when the Canadians observe their Thanksgiving, not November. And it's coming up Thanksgiving weekend. We're not doing a whole lot for it, but, we're just kind of hanging out, somewhat local and all that type of stuff. And anyways, the weekend happens and nothing exciting. And I get a phone call on Tuesday after the weekend is done. And it's from a media or one of the reporters who's been following our case and publishing all sorts of terrible stuff about us, the false narrative, helping to propagate that. He's part of the Canadian press. But he phones me and he says, "Hey, what do you think about the recent appeal that the Crown's made?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, the Crown appealed." I said, "When did they appeal?" He says, "They appealed last Friday." None of the media picked it up. So what happens is when you go to, you're going to make a court filing, you have to have numerous copies of that, and they get stamped saying they've been accepted, they've been filed in the courts. One stays with the courts, one stays with the person who's filing, and the other copy goes to the other affected party or parties. So they were supposed to supply us with that, either digitally or to make sure that we had it in person, and do so quite rapidly. The Crown didn't do it. They didn't even try to get that filing into our hands. They were hoping that here they're publishing, or they're filing this on the Friday, that they're about to, just like they've been doing the previous years, scheduling stuff on my birthday, scheduling stuff on the anniversary date of Ezekiel's death, trying to really, kind of grind it in, have a psychological impact on us. Here they're trying to ruin our Thanksgiving weekend with us being lambasted with the media all of a sudden picking it up and covering it just as we're about to go into the Thanksgiving weekend. But it didn't happen. For some weird reason, none of the media picked up on it until after the weekend. It's like they all started to take Friday off early before that court filing made it in. And so anyways, here we are Tuesday, and I'm hearing the news from somebody who's covering the news saying, you've got an appeal against you, which is completely inappropriate. So anyways, we weren't unaccustomed to, inappropriate court tactics and all that type of stuff with how the Crown had played this whole case up to that point. So yeah, here we are. We're all of a sudden like, oh, we're getting sucked back in. Here we thought 7 years, completion, it's done. Finally, we won. We had our day in court. We got the evidence out there. We won fair and square. We won in a very, a very compromised standpoint, being that I was self-representing, didn't have a lawyer. Colette had a few lawyers kind of kicking in as time allowed for them, but they were really picking up on the case, watching me cross-examine, because they didn't have any time to prepare, and they were all showing up as their schedule dictated that they could. Hence why 3 different lawyers, showing up sporadically throughout the week.
Right.
So we won fair and square, and we're thinking we're done, and now we're not. We're sucked back into an appeal.
Yeah, it's wild that those types of tactics being used, on your birthday, on anniversaries, Thanksgiving, just doing everything they possibly can to rattle the cage. I mean, you can't call that a coincidence. It just seems to be a very deliberate tactic from a government entity, which is just like, it just makes absolutely no sense unless they were, consider them the bad guys in this whole story. But it's quite something. But obviously we're talking about like the end of 2019, and the whole world changes very, very quickly during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, just as we're about to get into this whole, I don't even want to call it a pandemic. I mean, realistically, if the news didn't tell us it was a pandemic, would have anybody thought there was a pandemic? Really?
I've yet to see any evidence of a pandemic, but yeah, exactly.
Right. There wasn't people getting sick all around me, and okay. Right. Like it wasn't that big of a deal. In fact, I didn't see a whole lot of issues occur till post COVID vaccination even being pushed on everybody. That's when I started to see people getting sick all around. But anyways, that's going to be a controversial topic that we might not want to go down that rabbit hole quite yet. But anyways, I was just using my eyes to observe, my ears to hear as to what was actually going on, rather than being spoon-fed my worldview coming from, mainstream media, who is clearly misleading the vast majority of people. So anyways, now we've got this appeal, and this appeal is based on 2 elements. One, they're saying that the trial judge was biased, and, they're adopting the idea that he was racist, just like Juliette Guichon and her crew were putting out there, as they were now making a filing against him with the Judicial Council of Canada. And then also all these doctors are saying the same thing. It was just a big ruckus from people that weren't in the courtroom. They had no idea what they were talking about. And yet here they are, they're leading the charge, and the media is just gobbling it up. I mean, it's just becoming a big story. This judge is racist. So they're going with that, but also that he erred in law. So there's 2 main elements to the appeal. He erred in law because what he determined is that the Crown had an onus to prove that medical attention would have made a difference to the outcome of whether Ezekiel would have lived or died. And if they couldn't prove it, if they couldn't show that, yeah, here's the evidence, and it doesn't, it just has to be basically beyond a reasonable doubt. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to say, because nobody would absolutely know whether or not it would have made a difference 100%. But you could say, statistically speaking, 80% of people that have whatever Ezekiel had, which was always up for debate because it definitely wasn't bacterial meningitis like they claimed it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so if they were able to prove, or let's say hypothetically that they actually proved with a certain level of certainty, which they weren't able to do, that he actually had bacterial meningitis, then they could say, here would be the expected outcome. And 80% or 90% or whatever of children, brought in at this point in time when the Steffens should have known better and should have taken him to a doctor, then he would have likely survived, 80 to 90% chance, something like that. They couldn't nail anything down. There was no level of certainty. And the fact that the whole thing, that they had no science to actually back up the bacterial meningitis claim. In fact, they had to use that faulty PCR test, which many people have learned about with the whole COVID issue, that they were using PCR tests, which even the inventor of the PCR test has come out and saying, you can't use that for this. Like you're going to get false positives.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with a PCR test. You will find what you're looking for eventually if you look hard enough. And that just means that you just have to amplify it more and more and more as you're cycling this test. And eventually you're going to find evidence of something that actually wasn't really there, right? That wasn't a causal factor, right? Because it's so incredibly scant, if you will, that it couldn't have possibly been a causal factor, but yet you found evidence of it. Now you can say, hey, there we go. Got our evidence. Here we go. And that's exactly what they did with Ezekiel to try to determine that he had bacterial meningitis using a PCR test on cerebral spinal fluid. And that test was not approved for anything but research purposes, not diagnostic purposes. And there's an email from the microbiologist to the pathologist saying, we did the test, but you can't use it for diagnostic purposes. What does the pathologist do? Puts it in his autopsy report and says, we used non-clinical research methodology to determine that he had bacterial meningitis. Right? Pretty sketchy. So anyways, those two main elements are being brought up. The judge was racist, biased, and that he erred in law because he said that the Crown would have to prove that medical attention would have actually made a difference in order for it to be classified as a necessary of life, and that then the Steffens failed to provide the necessaries of life, right? So the basis of the very charge was hinging on that. How did they fail to provide a necessary of life? You have to prove that it was a necessary of life. The Crown failed miserably in their attempts to do that. It's almost like they didn't even try because they had no leg to stand on.
That's right.
In the whole of it. So that's what the base of the appeal was, and now we're moving forward with that.
All right, and then we're talking about now like a time with yourself in this court case, but also with Truehope at the moment with COVID hitting and regulations, restrictions being input on the whole industry and I guess the whole world in regards to stores availabilities to be open, social distancing, etc. People not wanting to go outside and lockdowns. We're talking about natural health stores and the whole industry. A big shift and a bit of a big change. How did that affect Truehope?
Well, what was interesting is we were accustomed to going to health shows, and that was a large way of us interfacing with the general public and being able to market our products. What was of interest is that those health shows came to a close at the beginning of 2019 after a significant amount of adversity, because what happened was that the media actually began to stalk me, like legitimately. They began to determine well in advance where I was going to be for different events, whether I was doing a public lecture with a health food store or whether I was being invited to a health show to present over the weekend there. The media would find out about that and they would publish articles that in essence would communicate to the reader. By the time they were done reading the article, this is what would be derived from it, is that this health show or this health food store is hosting a baby killer. They wouldn't use those terms, but by the time that you were done reading it, that was the message that you would get from it. And so they were drumming up. They weren't reporting news. They were actually making news, because what it would do is it would then incite a little bit of vitriol from some people. We would see the online trolls, which we were well acquainted with for many, many years, going back to the early 2000s, attacking Truehope. And many of these people have direct links to the pharmaceutical industry. Oh, how interesting, right? All of a sudden, they come out of the woodwork and they create an online stir, as if the people were actually really angry about this. So it was an AstroTurf movement. It was not an actual grassroots movement where people were legitimately feeding into this, or bringing this concern forward. They were feeding into it. Some people would, because, hey, people love to project, their bitterness and whatnot inside of them, and sometimes they just need to be directed in that, right? And so they're being used as pawns. So they see this movement of, hey, all these people are mad about this, when in reality, no, there's only a few fake aliases that are really drumming up this issue online, in line with the media. So it became this kind of concerted effort. And what it resulted in is different health shows getting shut down. And the media was part and parcel to making it happen, because then they would go and cover the controversy after they incited the controversy. So they incite the controversy, then you get these online trolls making it look like there's a big hoo-ha about it, and then the media reports on that to make it look like it was actually real. But yet they were the catalyst in the first place, or they set the stage for it, as if they were the ones drumming up this grassroots movement that people were actually really concerned. I presented dozens of times between 2016, after the wrongful conviction, between then and 2019. And when the media didn't report on it, guess how much issues there were with my presentations? Zero. Exactly. Not one single concern coming forward. As soon as the media got involved, which then put it out there onto online, and then all of a sudden these internet trolls come out, all of a sudden it looks like it's this massive issue. So we already closed down those operations in 2019, had to, because the media became relentless. In fact, I had to start threatening to sue them. In fact, I had one reporter phone me and wanted to interview me, and I just said, hey, I'm just going to make it very clear to you, because I've seen how these articles are playing out. You guys are actually reporting false information, and you're doing so in a way to actually obstruct business and to do damage to not only Truehope, but to these health shows. I said, if you cross that line, I'm just putting you on notice right now. You cross that line, I'm suing you, because I've got perfect grounds to do so. And that put one article at bay, because they saw the hot topic. They realized that they were out of line, and that they were actually going against the initial retractions that we were telling them to make, because it just wasn't core evidence that they were actually reporting on. So we already shut that down. So when COVID hit, we were already well prepared. We had already kind of shifted gears, knowing that we couldn't really interface with the public. But it really put a strain on our reps, because we have a team of reps across Canada that are interfacing with stores on a regular basis. We had a demo team that was doing some work across Western Canada. All of that came to a grinding halt. And so we had to kind of really shift gears continually to see how can we get this out into the public. And so we started doing online training sessions, where we invite health food stores from all across Canada to attend these online training sessions that we were doing. So we really started to get a little bit more dynamic, if you will, in all of that. But really, one of the biggest ways that it affected Truehope is in the fact that, I love to speak truth. And when something doesn't sit right and I see that it's harming people, I'm going to speak up. And one of the issues I saw right off the bat going into April of 2020, late March, April, I'm like, this thing is a hoax. It absolutely stinks of a hoax. And I went and analyzed the CDC numbers on it. And, here we are now mid-April, and you have this pandemic and people are dying. And remember, at this point in time, the media is reporting updated numbers every single day as to the death count from COVID. Every single day.
Yeah.
I went and looked at the CDC numbers, and I said, this is sketchy, because what you have is deaths from COVID specifically. And at this point in time, they're reporting like 64,000 people dead. But the deaths from COVID, according to the CDC, were only 11,000, right? And then you have flu and pneumonia and COVID. So this is where the COVID-related deaths come from, and that's when they shifted their terminology to be 64,000 COVID-related deaths. Well, nobody's discerning between that and saying COVID-related. They're thinking COVID.
Right.
And so you see the rest of the numbers. So people that were dying from the flu, which is typical every year, there's a baseline of what you'd expect, and it's about 60,000 people by about that point in the year that will die from the flu in the US. And so I'm breaking down the numbers. I'm saying, this is interesting. Statistically speaking, you're actually less likely to die from infectious disease in 2020 up until April than you would have been in 2019 from January to April, or 2018. You were actually slightly, like by a few percentile, less likely to die from COVID or die from any infectious disease in 2020 than you were in the previous years. So where's all these extra deaths? They're not there. All they did was shifted the deaths from pneumonia and flu to now say those are deaths from COVID. And so I called it out, and this created a big ruffle, and because I'm directly associated to Truehope. And so all of a sudden now this big issue arises, and I'm being labeled as, this crazy person, and the media reports on me calling it a hoax, because it was. But by definition, a hoax is used to basically defraud somebody to remove rights and freedoms that they have. That is, in essence, the definition of a hoax. And people were being defrauded, and they were losing rights and freedoms. There's no debate about it. And now when we look back at it and we look at the numbers and all that, we see that I wasn't wrong. And I wasn't wrong because I was covering CDC's numbers. If I was wrong, CDC was wrong. But the CDC wasn't wrong. They were actually reporting on the overall deaths, and they just the media just wasn't really going by that. And the CDC was also being fraudulent in relation to how they communicated certain things. But when you actually broke down the numbers, it just didn't line up with what the media was telling you. And so that did have a negative impact on Truehope, because we had even some of our retailers phone us about me taking that particular approach, especially that early on, because a lot of people weren't seeing the writing on the wall yet.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas a lot of people have waken up, and they've waken up to a lot of the issues, and they will continue to wake up to the issues because the truth is still emerging, including the fact that they're pulling these COVID vaccines from the marketplace that people were mandated, basically forced to take. And now they're being pulled from the marketplace because the evidence shows that they're incredibly dangerous. Interesting. So anyways, that was a bit of a digression. But yeah, so that was really the major impact that it was originally having on us, is that we had to become more dynamic, but we'd already largely been prepared because the media had kind of pushed us out of the general public market, if you will.
Yeah. For me, a big red flag in all of this was the fact that, I trained as a nutritionist for 3 years. I worked with hundreds of different people, and people with psychological conditions, people with physical conditions. And a lot of the recommendations that I would make were super, super simple things like exercising for your mental health, moving your body daily, taking vitamin D, especially through the winter months. And it seemed to me that the government guidelines were to make people sicker, to lock people in their homes, to keep them out from the sun, and recommending something like a lockdown. There's no research whatsoever to claim that would even have a chance of working. Made absolutely no sense whatsoever from the get-go. I'm not a virologist, I'm not an immunologist, but that made absolutely no sense to me. But then it's like, okay, so you're advising us to do this, but it's like, people locked up into their homes just watching Netflix all the time, they are going to get sick, they are going to get depressed, they're going to get anxious even more if they already have those conditions. And there was no recommendation for home exercise or exercising in your yard, taking vitamin D because you can't get outside so much. Like, the fact that they weren't recommending anything at all that's healthy made me think that they just want people to get sicker and sicker and then be more reliant on drugs in the future. And the recommendation was, don't go to the hospital until you're super unbelievably sick, which, when it comes to holistic nutrition and prevention and treatment, that's not medical advice. That's sick advice. That's death advice. That's putting people in their graves earlier. So it made absolutely no sense to me from a nutritional standpoint, from a holistic standpoint, and somebody, you know, who works in the natural health field, when so many people who are just being bombarded with coordinated fear media are getting more and more anxious, getting more and more depressed, and there were no solutions being offered. It was just a one way cortisol hitting, adrenaline hitting, fear mongering tactic, and it was frighteningly obvious that that was a scheme, nothing more than a scheme.
It was almost as if they were attempting to create, and I say attempting at that point in time because they were actually successful in it, but attempting to create a mental health crisis,
Oh yeah.
which is really interesting. And not just from the fact that they were locking people up. One of the things that I did early on in 2020 is I did a breakdown of a research paper out of Johns Hopkins University from the 70s, where they did a breakdown using different crises, different economic crises in the past, and that they were able to create a direct correlation of the increase with the economic downturns. That for every percentile of unemployment, how many more suicides would be occurring, statistically speaking? How many more homicides would be occurring, statistically? How many more cardiovascular related deaths would occur because of increased stress? We obviously know that has a negative impact on heart health. And they had this broken down to a really good science using the past models that we've had, the Great Depression and all that. And it was interesting because that was one of the major elements here, is that they basically have tanked the economy. And I don't think it can actually pull out. We're still in a nosedive. And I honestly think that it's almost too far gone to correct at this point in time, which is really, really unfortunate. I think we've got some hard times ahead of us. And that comes from basic. I studied economics, Hayek economics, Austrian economics, whatnot, about a decade and a half ago. And so just looking at it, it looks like a pretty simple recipe that they put us beyond the point of no return. And I hope that's not the case, but that's what it appears to be. So they were doing that, though. They began that. They increased the money supply while they rapidly plummeted production, which could only create inflation or the potential for uncontrolled hyperinflation, which they've had to try to curb using interest rates, which now puts us more into a recession, depression type thing. So it's almost like they were trying to create a mental health crisis from multiple angles. Unemployment, people being economically deprived, right, in their own homes, people being locked in their own homes, being isolated from friends and family. And so it just seems really nefarious when you couple that with the fact that Canada's answer to that is introducing MAID, assisted suicide, that medically you can go get assisted suicide. And I know people that have done it, that have gone and gotten that. Like, that's their answer to the crisis, the mental health crisis that they created. That appears to be really nefarious. But who knows? Maybe that's just a conspiracy. Maybe it was just by chance that, they didn't know what they were doing. They created a mental health crisis, and then, well, it just seemed like a good idea to assist with suicide. Strange.
Yeah, strange, sickening. Yeah, it's quite a wild journey that we've been on, and there are the amount of times I've been surprised and then now not surprised by some of the things that we see. It's it's quite remarkable. But let's get back to the timeline here, because we could go off on COVID all day. We could go off on MAID all day. So let's get back into this here. So when was the appeal heard? And tell us about that.
Appeal was heard once again, third year in a row, June 11th, 2020, on my birthday. So that's the third year in a row that the Crown scheduled court hearings on my birthday.
Did they provide cake or muffins in the courthouse, or?
No, this time it was pretty boring. Well, actually, it was pretty boring. Like we were getting accustomed to going into the courthouse at that point in time, and this time we didn't even get to go into the courthouse. We just sat in our basement and watched on the big screen. It was one of the only times that the big screen actually gets used. We don't use TV really around here. But anyways, we turned it on and used WebEx to watch the hearing take place, the appeal hearing, because nobody was going into court. So I can tell Sean's in his living room and he set up a podium there. So Sean Buckley is representing us for the appeal. He's one of the lawyers representing us. He's representing me. And then Jason Demir's one of the other 3 lawyers in 2019 that was helping my wife. He's representing my wife. And then we've got these 3 judges, the top judges in all of Alberta, because at this point in time, Catherine Fraser, the chief justice for the appeal court in Alberta, so she is legitimately the top judge in Alberta. She appointed herself to the case. So we thought, oh, hey, maybe they're going to take this seriously. Well, they took it serious, all right, but not from a truthful standpoint. So what we saw is that Sean was just being shut down. And the one judge was saying, what's the relevance of the fact that Ezekiel went for 8.5 minutes with no oxygen in the ambulance? What relevance does that have? Well, we're talking about the causation of a death here. We know that a child died. We know, like, that's what's being presented to the courts, is that a child died. We need to determine how that child died so that we can determine what the parents saw or didn't see as you're trying to hold them criminally liable, saying, in essence, that you failed to provide the necessaries of life. Well, if they didn't see anything alarming and it caught them off guard, no case. Case closed, let them go, send out a public apology for lambasting them in the media and dragging them through the courts at this point now for over 7 years, right? And we're now actually up to 8 years by the time the appeal gets in, right? And so there's complete relevance as to how that child died. You know, that child being my son Ezekiel. How did he die? And so they're going at Sean, and we're watching this. We're not even part of it. We just get to observe it. So we're literally watching this debate go on between Sean and this judge. And so I'm becoming a little bit leery at that point, saying, all right, I see where this is going, right? And the judge is just becoming unconvinced completely that it has no relevance. Don't even bring it up. Don't even bring up the fact that he went for 8.5 minutes without oxygen, which is interesting because, you know, we now are waiting for a decision during that time. And, you know, so now we're going from June 11th, 2020. And typically we'd expect a decision on that day, or within a month and a half, up to a month and a half. Well, fast forward to March 8th, 2021, right? So now we're, you know, basically 3/4 of a year out. And all of a sudden a written decision comes into play. Now, I think it's prudent, based on what that written decision said, to understand the environment, the political environment, the what's going on in people's lives at this point in time. The COVID vaccine has just been released a few months previous, and they created demand for it, right? So we've only got limited, so only the elderly can get it, right, or whatnot. And so it actually creates this demand in people, a sense of urgency. Oh, I got to get it as soon as I can get it. And I actually knew people that were doing that. They were traveling cross border where there was these shots available to go get them on the US side versus waiting here in Canada. And it became this element of excitement for those that were actually bought into it. Now, the vast majority of people weren't bought into it. The vast majority of people that I'd spoken to, and these are just general people saying, no, not enough science, not getting it, whatever. And that's when we would see, you know, later on that year, coercive tactics being employed to make people get it because compliance just wasn't there. But here we are, March 2021. The environment is that this jab, this new experimental jab has just been released. And it's by definition at this point in time, it's not even a vaccine. They had to change the definition of vaccines because vaccines are antigenic in nature, right? They supply an antigen, which is a weakened or dead form of the virus, or a slight variant of the virus that now incites an immune response within us that we now build up antibodies to it. That's by definition what a vaccine was before that. It's antigenic in nature. These new COVID shots were not antigenic. No, in fact, most of them were mRNA changing, or they had mRNA in them, which is messenger RNA, right? It actually goes, or mRNA, which it goes in and will actually change the program in your body, right, to do something. So that's interesting. We're actually changing the biological function of our body. Like there's something much deeper going on here. It's actually changing, in essence, who we are as humans. And so now we have this coming out. So this decision is released. And I read through it, and it was not for us. In fact, what it says is basically go back to trial again. So here we are. We've gone through 2 trials. We've gone through 2 appeal applications to the Alberta Appeals Courts. We've gone through 1 appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. And now they're saying go for a 3rd trial. And this is basically unprecedented in Canada, right? 3rd trial. We're now 10 years into this. And they're saying, no, you're going for a 3rd trial. And so now we read the decision. And what was interesting is that it was so wrong on so many levels, misrepresented the facts completely. In fact, omitted facts intentionally, because when you're making an appeal, you have the opportunity to supply a 30-page factum. This is 30 pages of facts as to why the appeal shouldn't go through. So the appellant has the opportunity, and that's the Crown, to supply a 30-page factum saying this is why the appeal should go through. And us as the defendants each get, because there's 2 parties, Colette gets 30 pages, I get 30 pages. So 60 pages we submit to the appeal court to say this is why it's baseless, or this argument should not stand that the Crown is making. And one of those was over the whole racist thing where the judge is being said to be a racist. They were talking about how the judge had made note that it was really hard to understand Adiagbo, Bamidele Adiagbo, and that he made mention of garbled enunciations and all that. And it was completely true.
Yeah.
1 page of my factum was laying out the fact that I had argued before we even got into trial in 2019. I'd argued saying we should not have Bamidele Adiagbo available over CCTV because it's hard enough to understand him in person, and that every party involved is going to become extremely frustrated if we allow him to appear over CCTV. I said this in March of 2019. June 2019 is when the trial happened. The judge, Rook the Crook, allowed for him to be permitted to present over CCTV after the Crown had lied about how long the flights would be, how expensive they would be, and all this type of stuff. And they'd completely pulled the wool over everybody's eyes. And I didn't have the opportunity to quickly look that up online to find, direct flights would be less than half the time that they claimed and less than half the price that they claimed. And so anyways, here he appears over CCTV. And sure enough, the judge gets so frustrated that he orders that Adiagbo needs to appear in person and fly up from Indiana and come up and present in person because nobody's able to understand him. And even the court clerks or Madam Transcript is having a hard time making transcripts over the whole issue. You see holes in his transcript, not with unintelligible words. So he comes up and anyways, that was used against the judge to say he was biased. And they actually, the appeal judges actually say that we had never brought up any concerns about his speech prior to that, when 1 whole page out of my 30 pages was solely bringing up those concerns well in advance to that judge even taking any stance or any position in our case. And so they completely omitted that evidence and then lied about it and said that we didn't make any took no concerns with it until the judge took concerns with it. And so we're looking at this and we're saying, all right, where are they going with this? And it was a lengthy decision. It was a 34-page written decision. And this is where it becomes concerning, especially given the environment that we were in. So you'll remember that we shut down the whole vaccine part of the trial in early 2016 before we even got into trial, when we showed that we had 2 expert witnesses that were going to show that the vaccine that they claimed that would have saved Ezekiel's life could have killed him based on government reporting, right? And that if he did receive it, he still could have died from a Haemophilus influenza infection because obviously it wasn't that effective. And that was all based off of proper government reporting. As soon as the Crown knew that, they shut down that part of the trial. So there was no evidence to move forward with because it wasn't tried in 2016. 2019, there was 1 blip that popped up. I shut it right down immediately, saying that this expert is not qualified to speak on vaccines. And the Crown didn't go there again. And so the appeal judges have nothing to go off of in relation to any expert testimony whatsoever when it came to vaccines and the cause of death of my son. But yet we see on 3 different occasions in the written decision that these appellant judges made is that they resurrect the whole vaccine issue. And they go so far as to say this at one point in time. So they're going off on a tangent, and they're talking about Dr. Adiagbo and all this type of stuff. And then they say this: we pause here to observe. So in essence, they're saying, we're going to digress for a moment emphatically, right? We pause here to observe that the fact Ezekiel had not been vaccinated was a highly relevant consideration for a pathologist diagnosing a cause of death. Okay, so diagnosing a cause of death that would almost certainly have been avoided. Okay, so that death would have almost certainly been avoided if the subject had been vaccinated. So in essence, what they're saying, not in essence, what they're saying directly is that death of my son would have almost certainly been avoided had he been vaccinated. They had no testimony to go off of to even come to that conclusion. And these are not doctors. These are judges. So how could they possibly make that type of assertion? They can't. It's wrong. That's an appealable point right there. And so it's interesting, though, that they're grouping that into the decision. And that, in essence, what they're saying is the judge erred in saying that the Crown had to prove that medical attention would have made a difference. They then go so far as to say basically that medical attention is, by virtue, a necessary of life, as if it's as important in our lives to preserving our lives as water, food, shelter, clothes, right?
Yeah.
So they're now grouping it in. The medical attention is that Western medical attention, by the way. So it's extremely monopolizing, extremely biased, and very exclusive, excluding naturopathic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, homeopathic medicine, anything else that's outside of the Western model of medicine, which is Rockefeller-based medicine or petroleum-based medicine. Anything outside of that is not deemed to be a necessary of life, but somehow petroleum-based medicine that is highly controversial, can be quite dangerous. Over 100,000 people die in North America every single year from taking properly prescribed medications the way that the doctors instructed them to do. Over 100,000 people dying every year, and that's underreported. And yet somehow that's a necessary of life. That's suspicious. That's really interesting, right? And so they basically turn medicine in this written decision into a necessary of life, and then they group the vaccination element to that as part of that. So now we have this precedent. And Sean Buckley's reading this, and he's saying basically, like, this is, like a vaccine, like type passport thing. Like, it's that powerful in its precedent that this could be used against all of the public who chose not to vaccinate for COVID. That this could be used as a sledgehammer to basically beat them down, right? Interesting timing. March 8th, 2021, right after the release of the COVID shot, the appellate court judges, the top judges in Alberta, make a written decision, bring up evidence that they didn't have, or basically substantiating facts that they had no evidence to support, to say that Ezekiel, his death would have almost certainly been avoided, and that vaccines and medical attention, in essence, are a necessary of life. Absolutely dirty.
What an unbelievable claim. Just unbelievable. And yeah, as you say, like vaccine hesitancy, such a hot topic at that time. That's all we were hearing about as the only possible solution for, surviving COVID-19 and the pandemic. So it must have been a hot topic going around. And the fact that they're able to actually write that down as judges, not doctors, is it's mind blowing that that's even allowed. Like, it's very confusing.
Well, even Bamidele Adiagbo, the one who falsified Ezekiel's autopsy report, he wasn't willing to make that bold of a statement. None of the doctors that took the stand were ever willing to make that bold of a statement in the preliminary hearing when they were allowed to speak of it in 2014. And they weren't qualified as expert witnesses during that point, I'm pretty sure. I think that they were just bearing testimony to substantiate whether or not there was a case. And so for the appellate court now, 7 years after the last evidence was ever given in relation to vaccines, and they didn't cite any of the preliminary hearings. 7 years after, all of a sudden, they're pulling out much more solid evidence than ever was brought or over the stand that was ever testified to in the court case. Very, very shocking, really. Like, it just, so now we're concerned because they also provided guidance in their appeal decision as to how the third trial should happen. And it was incredibly devastating to our defense. Now, just keep in mind, at this point in time, we've never received a full disclosure. We're missing evidence, crucial evidence. The first 2 trials were illegal, should not have happened because a full disclosure was never once provided to us. And we have evidence to show that there's other evidence out there because there's certain medical files that are relying on previous medical files. Those previous medical files have been scrapped in a whole black hole. A whole hour and a bit of Ezekiel's care during a very critical time disappeared, completely disappeared, right? Somebody's liable for jail time for destroying medical evidence, and yet there's no investigation taking place. And the courts, Rook the Crook, in essence, was just saying, nope, we have what we have, and you're going to move forward with this. Right. I'm saying we need a full disclosure. We don't have it. We need that evidence. We need to know what happened to Ezekiel to understand how he got to the point that he died. What happened during that critical time in the hospital, right? During transport to the Alberta Children's Hospital. Nope, crickets, nothing. Nope, we're moving forward with this. So we're already deprived there. Now the appeal court is saying, third trial, you don't even get to use some of this evidence. It's not relevant, right? We're not going to debate causation of death. Well, wait a minute then. So do we just accept that he had bacterial meningitis, which he didn't, and then we can say, hey, the Crown can say the Steffens were ignoring these symptoms of bacterial meningitis, which we weren't because he didn't have it, right? So the whole thing was dirty. And so I'm looking at this, I'm saying, oh boy, we're done. Like, we're going to jail. Like, there'll be nothing short of a miracle for us to get out from underneath this. And I'm just feeling really, really hesitant about it at this point in time. And I'm seeing how corrupt the Alberta courts are. So we appealed to the Supreme Court for a number of reasons. One, to get this appeal turned over because it was absolutely egregious in nature. And they were basing it off of evidence that they didn't have. And so we're saying, hey, they're way wrong. And they're omitting evidence. They're intentionally omitting the defense's evidence that was brought forward for the appeal to draw up these conclusions. And they're writing a false narrative based on omitting or ignoring that evidence. And so we're going to Supreme Court for that. But we're also going to Supreme Court for the fact that we don't want this precedent sitting over parents' heads here in Canada, that now it can be used as a sledgehammer to beat them down because they chose not to give their child the COVID shot. And so now we're going to the Supreme Court to try to get this all rectified. Now, typically, what would happen during that time is that they would shut down the third trial. They would stay it. They would, until we hear what happens from the Supreme Court. Doesn't happen. Alberta courts are saying, nope, you're moving forward with the third trial, regardless of what's going on with the Supreme Court. So now we're doing a Supreme Court application. We're preparing for a third trial at the same time. And both those are pretty costly. And so now we're just being, strung out. We're being spread extremely thin. And so we were really, really just praying for a miracle. Like, how do we get out from underneath this? How do we do this? This just seems like way too much. They are dealing with us in such a corrupt way. They think that they've got checkmate. They're breaking us down. How do we do this? Right? So.
Well, we come to an interesting part in the story where you just use the word miracle comes along, and that's kind of exactly what we see in this next part of this story involving Dr. Adiabo.
Well, there's a major twist that began to happen. And so what happens is we weren't the only ones that took issue with Bamidele Adiabo. I guess he was a dodgy guy. Back then, if you did a Google search, I'm not sure if it's still there today because, hey, censorship is a real thing. And there's been a significant amount of censorship surrounding him since all this took place. They're trying to cover it up as to what actually happened to Bamidele Adiabo. But there's a twist in the story because you've got people that are actually posting stuff online, complaining about Bamidele Adiagbo and the autopsy reports that he is performing. Well, he ticks off a guy. This guy's cousin is found burned to death in his van. And I'm going to try to relay the story as accurate as possible here based on what was given to me over the years, but some of it might be fragmented. My understanding is that his cousin had just received a massive bid, won a bid in northern oil country for millions of dollars for these contracts. And so at a time that he would normally be celebrating, he's found burnt to death in his van. Bamidele Adiagbo gets the file and concludes that it was a suicide, which would potentially absolve his competition, another ethnic group, because these were East Indians that the family, the guy who got the bid, and there's another ethnic group, I guess, that was going for the bid as well, trying to get the contracts, and they didn't get the contract. And then this guy's found burned to death. So there is some element of suspicion surrounding it in relation to all of this that his cousin was speaking about, and his cousin being in East India. So Bamidele Adiagbo deems it to be a suicide, which completely drops the investigation into other potential suspects who would have a vested interest in removing this guy for significant financial benefit. And so anyways, this cousin starts digging in deep, and he's now on a life mission to expose Adiagbo. And it gets pretty deep. I think I have it here on my desk. Sorry, I've got a bunch of papers here.
We're good.
Oh yeah, that's it. So this cousin goes and gets, some stacks of paper on Adiagbo, right? In relation to his licensing. And it goes back to his early days in Nigeria. And so, there's a listed school on his transcripts as to where he became a doctor in Nigeria. So Bobby Ray phones the number. Bobby Ray's the cousin of the individual who was burned to death in his van. Bobby Ray phones the number on the transcripts, and it just goes to a pub in Nigeria, not a school. Okay, well, maybe they changed their number. That's interesting. But then he goes digging through the transcripts with a fine-tooth comb and finds discrepancies. He finds name changes. He finds in relation to Adiagbo, where at some points he's representing himself under one name, and then he's representing himself under another name a little bit later on. Now, during this time, he's also failing his medical tests, and you only have so many chances at taking these tests. And he's failing them, but then he's representing himself under a different name, almost as if he's trying to start off at square one again, right? Is what it seems like. And then there's different places that are being listed on his medical transcripts as to where he's done his internship and all of that. And it's not lining up. And in fact, eventually what would happen is a credential fraud investigation would take place. An investigation started up in the state of Kansas in May of 2020. So just before our appeal takes place, and also in the state of Indiana. And he's living down in Indiana at this point in time. And what people weren't aware of is the fact that he had to work under doctor supervision because he had failed his test too many times in the US to be able to operate on his own accord. So even now that he's done in Alberta, he's done all of these hundreds of autopsies in Alberta from basically, I think, 2011 to about 2018. Actually, I think it's in the thousands of autopsies. And he moves back to Indiana as soon as we blew the whistle, which is ironic. We blew the whistle in May of 2018, exposing all of these doctors that had committed perjury in our first trial in 2016. And he moves in June of 2018. So a little ironic, the timing. He moves back to Indiana, but he has to work under the supervision of another doctor because in the States, he's not allowed to operate on his own. He's not credible. And yet here in Canada, they're propping him up to be very credible. And in fact, a big part of the written decision from the appeal court in the last decision is that they were talking about how prestigious Bamidele Adiagbo was, right? In his credentials. And he's basically propping him up, put him up on this pedestal. Meanwhile, what they're not aware of is the fact that there's credential fraud investigation taking place during that time in the state of Indiana and the state of Kansas. And it ends up finally getting some traction. Unfortunately, none of the Canadian media would touch it. None of them would touch it. And it was brought forward to them. But there was one media outlet that actually did cover the story. I think we have access to that, do we not?
We do, yeah. It was 12 News in the States. So let me just bring that
Fact
up.
Finder 12, yes. Fact
Yeah.
Finder 12 is what they're called.
And this is the video.
Forensic pathologist who once worked for the Sedgwick County Forensic Science Center. While there, he conducted hundreds of autopsies for murders, suicides, even testifying as an expert witness in homicide cases. Fact Finder 12 investigator Alex Flippin looked into the doctor's records, finding inconsistencies about where he said he worked and when he said he worked there, raising questions about his education and training. Questions he took to the state of Kansas to find out if they saw the same inconsistencies, and if so, why they granted him a license.
In January of 2014, my cousin was found burned to death inside of his vehicle. Bamadel Ladiago wrote the autopsy report.
Because of bizarre circumstances surrounding his death, Bob Ray of Alberta, Canada, believes his cousin was murdered. And he believes this man, Dr. Bamadel Andiagbo, was incorrect when he ruled the death a suicide while working as a forensic pathologist in the country. We spoke to Bob Ray by Zoom. The connection was a little spotty, but what he said was clear enough.
And that's how he came onto my radar, and I started researching into where he started his career, where he got his education, etc. And it took me all the way back to the state of Kansas.
And to us at Fact Finder 12. Bob Ray wanted our help looking into Dr. Bamadel Adiagbo, so we did. Dr. Adiagbo worked for the Sedgwick County Forensic Science Center from 2008 to 2011. While there, he performed 895 autopsies, 109 of them suicides, another 43 deemed homicide. We spent months combing through hundreds of pages. Adiagbo's school records, test scores, places he's worked, the applications he filled out to work there. What we found were inconsistencies, a lot of them.
Let's start in Kansas, where on his application to become licensed to practice in the state, he says he spent a little less than a year from 1998 to 1999 working as a therapeutic counselor for the Salvation Army. Now let's go to Indiana, where Adiagbo works as a doctor now. On the application to that state, he lists the same job, this time saying he worked there not from 98 to 99, but from 98 to 2001. The same years, but different dates are listed for the Salvation Army job on another record, this one held by the FCVS, a service used by medical boards to check doctors' work and education records. 3 different forms, 1 job, and 3 different date ranges. Back to Kansas now. Adiagbo's application says he held 2 positions at Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia, 13 months total. One of those months serving in a pathology observership. In Indiana, Adiagbo lists that same position, but says he started that job in December of 1999. Remember, on the Kansas form, he said he began that job in January of 99, a discrepancy of almost a year. Also, on that form, he doesn't even list the observership. Then, on the FCVS records, Fox Chase isn't mentioned at all. So we contacted Fox Chase Cancer Center to see if they could provide us exact dates when Adiagbo was there. And we were told, quote, "No one recalls anyone by that name, and we don't usually sponsor observerships in surgical pathology." So we asked they double check, and we were told, quote, "He was not in the surgical pathology department at any time." Back to Kansas again, where in June of 2008, Adiagbo tells the Kansas Board of Healing Arts he has never been denied a license to practice, except, according to the state of Louisiana, he had 3 months earlier. We also find that he was denied a license in Louisiana on his application to Indiana. Now, one last trip back to Kansas, where the Kansas Board of Healing Arts tells us they do not allow applying doctors to supply their medical transcripts themselves. We were told, quote, official transcripts must be provided/verified, generally the Federation Credentials Verification Service. So back we went to the FCVS, where we found that they, after several attempts, were unable to obtain the transcripts from Adiagbo's medical school in Nigeria.
So why does this matter? Because the determinations made by forensic pathologists help guide criminal cases. They help determine if something criminal occurred that led to a death. Was it a suicide, a homicide? And they're often called to testify under oath about their findings. They have to be credible. After all, juries will use parts of their testimony to determine guilt or innocence. And Dr. Adiagbo's records certainly raise questions, and for some, they raise concern.
All those things are red flags that should suggest to you, me, and the defense attorney that this expert is not qualified.
And Adiagbo did testify in homicide cases. So we asked Monet whether what we uncovered could have any impact on those cases, all now heard by juries more than a decade ago.
You've got to be able to demonstrate to the court three things. Number one, that the testimony provided by the expert, as here, is in fact false, that the prosecution knew it was false, and that the perjured testimony was material.
Which Monet says is a complex uphill battle that has limited possibilities of success for anyone hoping for a new trial.
So if you were one of those defense attorneys, what are you thinking at this point? And then what do you say?
And then you've got to make a decision about whether to contact your client and suggest that an additional action may be in order on his or her behalf.
So, now removed by years, the question, maybe not what can be done, but maybe what needs to be done.
Organize a panel to review all of the cases in which the suspect expert testified and review them to see if there are convictions that ought to be set aside. And I applaud all the prosecutors that have done that. And there's no reason to think that wouldn't happen here.
Do you think it should happen here?
Based on what I've seen so far, yes. It certainly seems like this should be reviewed by a prosecutorial authority.
A similar thought to that of Bob Ray, who says he may never get the answers to his questions about his cousin's death, but he may very well not be the only person with questions.
So I feel that any autopsy report that Adiagbo has ever conducted needs to be re-examined.
I was eventually able to reach Dr. Adiagbo at the hospital where he works in Indiana. I shared with him what I'd found. He says administrators at Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia may not remember him because he wasn't there very long. He also says at the time he applied for a license in Kansas, he didn't know he'd been denied a license in Louisiana. Since leaving Kansas, Dr. Adiagbo has continued working as a forensic pathologist with no record of censure or infraction that I could find. The real question, how was a doctor with the inconsistent records that we found able to receive a license in Kansas? I took that question to the Kansas Board of Healing Arts that granted the license. They tell me the AMA confirmed Adiagbo's education. And even though they also tell me they require the medical school a doctor attends to provide his records, they accepted notarized copies from Adiagbo himself and a certificate from the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates. Finally, they tell me that our investigation raises new factual allegations that they are now addressing. But that Kansas law prohibits them from talking about their investigation with me unless the board files a petition for discipline. For Fact Finder 12, I'm Alex Wood.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, those organizations, Fact Finder 12, they won't spend all that time, all those resources and that money to do that investigation if there wasn't clear discrepancies and clear issues. And yeah, just from that 8-minute clip, which I'll leave a link to if people want to share that or look into it further. Yeah, it just goes to show that there was some serious sketchy behavior going on with this pathologist.
And we were already well aware of that sketchy behavior throughout our previous trials, how he was leaving the country basically. Well, okay, 2019, he wasn't leaving the country. He wasn't coming into the country. 2016, he was leaving the country one day after testimony, the very next day. 2014, he was leaving the country one day after testimony. Mm-hmm. He was always scheduling himself to be out of the country. I think he was concerned about something being exposed, and that before any legal action could take place against him, that he was in a different jurisdiction where they wouldn't have access to him. That's what it appears to be. But maybe it's just coincidence. I don't know. But it was just a pattern that was emerging. And that finally, when we were able to get him into Canada in 2019 for the trial, rather than CCTV, he was being escorted by 2 plainclothes RCMP at any given time. They would go to the bathroom with him, everything. He would not be unattended. So there was something much deeper going on behind the scenes here in relation to what he was aware of and what he probably knew the potentiality could be of consequences for his egregious actions over the years. Of how many people did he criminalize that weren't criminals? How many people did he let go free based on bad autopsy reports that should have been criminals, that should have, suspects are going off scot-free? The whole of it was just so dirty. And this really had such phenomenal implications, because if it came out that he actually wasn't a doctor, you've got the state of Kansas, the state of Indiana on the hook. You've got Alberta on the hook. And we're talking for tens or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of lawsuits. Like, our lawsuit alone would have been in tens of millions for what they did to us. Their career destroying tactics and all this type of stuff, everything. It absolutely, it impacted every single area of our life.
Yeah.
Every single area of our life. Friends, family, finances, mental health. I mean, obviously, and I'm just glad that, hey, we got products here to help us, because I don't know how we would have got through all of this when you've got the media spewing garbage, and literally you have dozens of death threats coming in on a regular basis because of what the media is saying. You're starting to question your existence a little bit and say, all right, you're right. How are we going to get through this? And this is all based off of the it all began with the false autopsy, or the falsified autopsy that Bamidele Adiagbo put out in relation to Ezekiel. So this is going on behind the scenes. And so what a beautiful thing, because we now fast forward. So we got March 2021. Alberta Appeal Court comes out with this terrible decision, and they're throwing us back for a third trial. We're appealing to Supreme Court. We're now strung thin, preparing for the third trial and Supreme Court. June 2021 rolls around. And I remember exactly what happened. We're here hanging out. We decided we're going to go down to the reservoir, drive 8 minutes down the road, take the family there. We're going to go swimming. And myself and Colette didn't do any swimming, because just as we get there, the kids are piling out of the vehicle. We get a phone call from our lawyers saying that the Crown has just stayed the charges. And I'm thinking, why? What just happened? But I kind of knew why, because I'd started to follow this. The day before, June 21st, 2021, Bamidele Adiagbo now had his own criminal proceedings scheduled against him. You see, because in May of 2020, after the credential fraud investigation opened up in both the state of Kansas and Indiana, about a week later, Bamidele Adiagbo went to a pub and he got drunk, like pretty drunk. And then he drove his Mercedes down the road and he rear-ended a lady and injured her, and ended up with a level 5 felony in the state of Indiana. And as much as they were trying to drag it out, finally a year later, they had his trial scheduled on June 21st, 2021. It was going to be scheduled for September of 2021. And so they finally scheduled it. And as soon as they scheduled it, the very next day, the Crown reaches out and says, we're staying the charges. Why? Because the entire premise of the charges hinges off of this falsified autopsy report. And it didn't matter how much the appeal courts just propped Bamidele Adiagbo up, putting him up on a pedestal, saying how prestigious of a doctor he is. That meant nothing, because here he has charges against him, and he has 2 credential fraud investigations taking place against him at the same time. He has no credibility. And so they drop it. They don't give us a reason. But then they tell the media. In fact, actually, you know what? I think we have a media article. Rather than me telling you what the Crown told the media, let's see what the Crown told the media based on the media.
Yeah, we got it here.
All right. This is a CBC article, our lovely Crown-owned propaganda machine. government-funded newscaster here in Canada. Okay, were facing a third trial. So David and Colette Stephan were facing a third trial in the death of their son. So if we scroll down there, just real briefly. So to the highlighted, David and Colette Stephan were accused of not seeking medical attention sooner for their 18-month-old son. Sean Buckley, a lawyer for the Stephans, said Tuesday he received a letter from the Crown about the decision. The Crown dropped the charges, Buckley told the Canadian press. I don't want to read too much. I want to see where the... Okay, here it is. So about 4 down. It has been more than 9 years since the child passed away, and the available evidence has deteriorated since the previous 2 trials, the service said in an email late Tuesday, or the Crown said. Okay, so Crown prosecution sends it out. So it's been more than 9 years since Ezekiel passed away, and available evidence has deteriorated. Now, the visual that this gives the public is that, oh, wow, like you have heat strips or something, like, you know how you print out on a receipt and it deteriorates over time. It's almost like, or maybe somebody spilled their coffee on the only copy and we had no digital copies of the evidence, right? Like this evidence has been strewn all over the place. Nothing's deteriorated. And if one deteriorated or coffee got spilled on one, I mean, there's 100 to replace it somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Like this has gone through the hands of so many people. It's laughable. What in essence they're communicating is that the evidence hasn't deteriorated, that the credibility of their star witness has completely deteriorated, and that they have no way of getting that evidence into court. Now, they could have hired another pathologist to go and review it and to qualify it and to put his rubber stamp on it and say, I'm willing to back it. But it appears that no other pathologist was willing to put themselves out on that limb. This is a career suicide venture. It is so out on a limb. His findings of the autopsy were not founded in science. He has no leg to stand on. No other pathologist is going to back him up. And so they had to stay the charges. As much as they wanted to get that precedent through in Canada, they had to stay the charges. Our miracle happened. Absolutely. So now we have a decision. Are we going to stop going to the Supreme Court or not? We decided to continue on. Why? Because now it's not about bringing back our acquittals, our not guilty verdict, but it's also, this is mainly now about rights and freedoms here in Canada, because that precedent, that egregious precedent in Alberta still stands from the top courts in Alberta that now has sway all across Canada. It'll be taken with significant weight. So we continue on with the Supreme Court. But what a weight lifted off of our chest.
Yeah.
And seriously, what a miracle. Like we had very little idea of what was actually taking place behind the scenes back in May of 2020. It wouldn't be till a little bit later on that Bobby Ray is reaching out to us and saying, look, this is what's taking place. You're going to want to watch this and see what's going on. And so here we're in an incredible debt of gratitude to Bobby Ray for doing what he's doing. Now there's a twist, though, an interesting twist that takes place. You see, before the appeal court did this dirty, February 2021, I get a phone call from Bobby Ray. And he says, hey, the RCMP, the Calgary police have reached out to me. And they're saying that I need to come in, that the Crown instructed the police to phone me, right? Or the police, yeah. And to tell me to come in, and that they're going to arrest him for criminal harassment of Dr. Bamidele Adiagbo, and that he needs to bring all of the evidence that he has with him on Bamidele Adiagbo. Okay, you remember that evidence, that stack of evidence?
Yeah,
going back, anyways, that big stack there, right? So a few hundred pages of evidence. He needs to bring that in with him and supply it to them. Well, you know exactly what they're doing. They know what's going on. They found out that the credential fraud investigation is happening down in the States. They know that Bamidele Adiagbo is on charges now for a level 5 felony in the state of Indiana. The Crown is seeking for that evidence to find out how big of a landmine that they've just stepped on.
Right.
They need to find this out. He phones me and says, "What do I do?" I said, "Don't turn yourself in. Do not turn yourself in. In fact, you need to go and you need to consult with a lawyer on this matter." But I said, "They haven't come and arrested you because they don't have the evidence against you. They're wanting you to go in, and they're wanting you to supply all this evidence that they can begin to spin and twist it already and come up with a narrative on how to get themselves out from underneath us." I said, "Don't do it." So he did consult with a lawyer, and the lawyer repeated the same thing. Don't turn yourself in. Let them come and get you and make backup copies of all of that evidence. So he did. That's how I got my hands on it. Backup copies. Now, I also got copies, a digital copy of a voicemail that was left on Bobby Ray's voicemail that was really interesting. What happened is, according to Bobby Ray, he tells me this. He says, Bamidele Adiagbo phoned me out of the blue and started reaming me out. And I said, "How did you get my number? Don't ever phone me again." And then I hung up on him. So then Bamidele Adiagbo phones back again, and Bobby Ray doesn't answer it. So he lets it go to voicemail. And Bamidele Adiagbo leaves this tirade, just angry rant on Bobby Ray's voicemail. So it's interesting. Bobby Ray doesn't want to have communication with Bamidele Adiagbo. And Bamidele Adiagbo is phoning him repeatedly and just reaming into him. And yet they're going to charge Bobby Ray for criminal harassment of Bamidele Adiagbo when all the evidence actually suggests the opposite. I wouldn't say to the point of criminality, but that if there is any harassment, it's coming from Bamidele Adiagbo, not Bobby Ray. So that was interesting. So Bobby Ray continues on doing what he's doing and exposing what was going on with Bamidele Adiagbo. And that news clip that we viewed there, Fact Finder 12, comes out, I believe it was December 2021. Well, I'm in contact with Bobby Ray about once every month or two just to get the lowdown as to where the criminal proceedings are with Bamidele Adiagbo, because he's keeping a real watch on it. And it's not that easy to find. Like, the information is not readily available. And there was only one Canadian news article. There was one CBC article that came out talking about Bamidele Adiagbo's charges for drunk driving. There's almost nothing on him. The media has gone silent, even though this is a major turn to this whole saga, a major twist that's newsworthy. They're not covering it. So Fact Finder 12 covers this. They're the only mainstream news source to do so. I go to phone Bobby Ray a month after that Fact Finder 12 comes out. I can't get a hold of him. So I leave him voicemail. Okay, it's not terribly uncommon. I'll get him, maybe half the time, whatever. I leave voicemail. He gets back to me within a day or two. Nothing. Phone him back a couple weeks. Nothing. Hey, this is weird. Talk to my brother. My brother had been working with him too. Hey, have you heard from Bobby Ray? No. There's some documentary producers that have been producing a documentary. Has not yet come out. I'm not sure where they're at with it actually, but they had been following us for years. Since 2018 was the first time that they started recording, and they followed us for years on this matter, heavily into 2020 even. And they had been in contact with Bobby Ray because Bobby Ray became, a part of the story in relation to what he was finding on Bamidele Adiagbo. And so they interviewed him. So I contacted them and said, "Hey, have you guys heard from Bobby Ray?" I said, "No." Said he seems to be missing, and now we're at a few months that nobody's heard from him. So we're like, "Hey, where is he?" Can't figure it out. Thought, did somebody kill him? This is a pretty quiet guy, lived by himself. He had a job. I can't remember what his employer's name was, so I couldn't reach out to him to find out what was going on. And so for somebody like him to disappear, it would be crickets. Very few people would actually be aware of it, and it wouldn't make news. You wouldn't find a missing persons report going up on him really or anything. So this twist emerges where, I guess we'll fast forward to it. He all of a sudden pops back up. Now remember, this is early 2022. He disappears. All of a sudden he pops back up in the media, in alternate media sources, in late 2023, right? Turns out that in early 2022, So this is almost a year after the police had phoned him and said that they're going to arrest him and that they were harassing him, and that they phoned him actually a few times telling him to come in, all the way into March of 2021. And I just kept on saying, dude, take courage, man. I even supplied him some supplements for the stress that he was going through and whatnot to help him through it, right? Just keep your head on straight. Just stay strong. They're trying to break you. So almost a year later, he goes to the RCMP and he's concerned about his own life. And based on some information that he had, he seemed to have good reason to be concerned for his life. Similar to his cousin. What do? They can't criminally charge him because they didn't have any evidence. Well, there's a much easier back door to apprehending people here in Canada. Oh, you think your life is at risk, do you? Huh. We're going to throw you in a psych ward. They threw him into a psych ward. They threatened him that if he continued to talk about Bamidele Adiagbo, that they would keep him there for 2 years. This is what he's stating, that they're actually threatening him that if he keeps on speaking out about Bamidele Adiagbo, that they're going to keep him in the psych ward for 2 years.
Wow.
He's there for a good chunk of time and then gets out and then finally goes public again. Nobody heard from him in that period of time. Nobody. We're all phoning him. We're trying to figure things out. We're trying to see where things are with him and with Adiagbo and all that. Nothing. Crickets, because they've apprehended him. Rather than putting him in jail because they didn't have the evidence to do so, they throw him into a psych ward. And I know Bobby Ray. And I know mental health because it's what my life has been for 21 years. Bobby Ray is an individual who is under a lot of stress, but he was also taking supplements for it. I was supplying those supplements. He was not a candidate for a psych ward, not even close. And yet here they admit him to the psych ward because he has concerns about his life based on what he's been doing. And it's a pretty good reason, right? Like this isn't just these conspiracy movies that, people disappear and whatnot. This is real life.
Right. And
this type of junk actually happens. So anyways, that was an interesting twist to the story. We all thought that he was dead. We thought that that either that or that they had put him in jail somehow and that the media didn't report a single thing on it, right? So yeah, really, really interesting twist that takes place there in their attempts to shut Bobby Ray up about Bamidele Adiagbo. And the reason being is they were going to try to cover up the whole Bamidele Adiagbo incident, the whole corruption, the whole issue. And if those credential fraud investigations deemed that he was not, in fact, a doctor, which the evidence is more supportive of, that would open up such a can of worms for those states that they have a vested interest to not find or come to that conclusion.
Yeah, that's right.
Because lawsuits, both the state of Indiana and the state of Kansas would be on the hook. So guess what they didn't find? They didn't find that there was any credential fraud credential fraud. How interesting, right? And yet the black and white, I've gone through the files. There's some funny business going on, and it smells like fraud. Like it's pretty interesting. So anyways, that was an interesting twist to the whole story of what they did to Bobby Ray. I'm just glad to see his face out and about again, though, because we were all concerned. We were all really concerned that they had taken him and offed him or something like that. Like, but they didn't. They just shoved him into a psych ward for a long time.
Yeah, and he plays a critical role in this story, especially with the FF12 investigation, the video we just saw, that news story. With his hesitancy on the pathological report from Dr. Adiagbo and his brother, like I don't think I've heard too many suicides of people who burn themselves alive in their own car. Like, who's that's so suspicious? And obviously Bobby Ray probably knew him better than anybody. And you mentioned about the good opportunity in regards to finance and business that he had. Yeah, it's very, very interesting that Bobby Ray, this really interesting character, kind of like comes into the story, comes out of it. But what a pivotal role he plays in regards to your court case, future of Truehope. It might seem like a little bit of a tiny part to play, but it ends up being huge.
Hey, it's why I'm not behind bars right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like legitimately, like I don't know, maybe a different miracle would have happened. I don't know. I mean, hey, like we've seen miracles. I mean, the very fact that Truehope came out is a miracle. It's an answer to prayer. So we've seen that. We've seen that that there is a Father in heaven who answers prayers when we earnestly seek, and that's the whole basis for Truehope. A desperate father seeking for answers for his children, so that they don't go down the road that their mother and that their grandfather went down, that led to suicide, and answers are given in really interesting ways, right? And very profound answers at that. And so it was, it was the miracle that we needed, though, because that third trial was not going to be a trial that was going to be won, right? Like, first of all, we've already seen how many corrupt judges. We finally got one good judge, right? The chances that you're going to get a good judge who's going to act justly in a situation like this, almost next to nothing, right? And then now they're cutting us off at the knees as to what evidence we can bring forward. That compromises our defense significantly, compounded with the fact that we still are missing evidence, that we never received the full evidence. So he played a significant role in helping to provide that miracle, like complete answer to prayer, that all of a sudden their whole case falls apart around them. Otherwise, that would be the end of David Steffen's story with Truehope, at least for a few years. It'd still be a couple of years yet, probably, that they would have tucked me behind bars, me and my wife, and then our children would be living in different circumstances, under the care of other people other than their parents, right? Who love them the most.
Yeah, who knows what could have happened if Bobby Ray didn't intervene and get involved. Quite remarkable. Okay, yeah. So crazy turn of events. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about, because while this is all going on and the Crown is holding for a year, like staying those charges, you still have the Supreme Court application appeal going on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how that went?
Yeah, so we're still pushing forward with that, once again, to get the law rectified, so that there wasn't this precedent that parents can go to jail for not vaccinating, right? So that's really what we're pushing forward with, and we're hoping to hear something back, like sooner than later. And the last time that we'd gone to Supreme Court, we made an application in November of 2017, and by May 15th, 18th, I think, of 2018, May 15th of 2018, we're in the Supreme Court. So not very many months, right? So we're talking like a total of 6 months for that time. So now we make an application in April of 2021. We're hoping that, we'll be into the fall session of 2021 with them. We're not. So then we hear word, though, that by December of 2021, that they were appointing 3 judges, 3 of the Supreme Court justices, to review the application. So that's taking it pretty seriously. Yeah. So they're really looking at it, because typically one would look at it and say, not a big case, whatever, not relevant, doesn't really impact Canadian law. And so, and at this point in time, the Supreme Court is accepting 1 out of every 10 applications that are brought forward to them, because there's only 1 courtroom. There's only 1 set of Supreme Court justices. There's 9 of them. And so they can only accept so many cases every year. So they take the most serious cases, the cases that will actually help to shift law or clarify law quite often. So anyways, we're expecting by January of 2022 to hear something, that maybe they're going to accept it. We're going to maybe be there by, April, May type of thing again to go there. And we're not hearing anything. And we're still not hearing anything. And it's just being delayed. And we're thinking, what's going on? Finally, August 2022 rolls around, and we got the notice. They turned it down, which was really disheartening, because we were really hoping, like Colette and myself were really hoping, especially after spending all that money as well. Like, we just put in a lot of money into the Supreme Court applications and whatnot, tens of thousands of dollars again. We were really hoping that would help solidify Canadians' rights, medical choice, parental rights in Canada, that they would use that to basically stop this egregious agenda from moving forward. But it didn't happen. And so I remember, just like, we were on the phone with Sean and Jason, the lawyers. And I remember just like this feeling like I don't even know what my purpose is. I feel like I'm a warrior without a war. Like, now what?
Yeah.
The whole thing's done. This has been, 10 years of our life at this point in time. And now it ends on that note, like just fizzles out. Now what do I do? Right? Like, now what battle am I going to fight? Because we all have our Everests that we need to be climbing, right? And this is just a principle in human behavior, is that when somebody doesn't have challenges in their life, they'll actually create challenges. And so just take a look at the most dramatic people around you, and it's because their life is somewhat boring, right?
Yeah.
Typically, because they actually need to create a challenge. We have an innate need to be doing something, to be conquering something, right? And that could be as simple as you're tilling the ground outside and you're planting seeds. It's your garden. It could be that challenge. We're beings of progress. We need to be constantly doing something to progress, right? We all have those mountains to climb. And so I felt like, that was the battle. That was my challenge for so many years. That was really kind of filling that need, amongst the fact that we were helping grow Truehope and, make major headway that way. But, now we're into COVID and things have really settled down. And now my major challenge in life has been removed. I'm just thinking, now what? Right?
Yeah, I really want people to understand what you were trying to accomplish with that Supreme Court hearing, because there's quite clearly an agenda from the Crown, the government, Health Canada, to have an example of negligent parents on the death or injury of a child where vaccination or a specific medication would have saved somebody's life. If they're able to do that, then they are able to bring in significant legislation, law, to say, if you have this child in Canada, you have to have them vaccinated. You have to have this schedule of medications in order to be involved in society. And once that happens, it's a part of, there are states in the US where if you want your child to go to school, you absolutely 100% must have the up-to-date schedule of vaccines. And I think that if you're somebody who wishes to have choice and medical freedom, then you need to be able to stand up for those rights. And I believe that's what you wanted to do, because we've had the conversation on multiple times during this incredible series that there was no precedence for the vaccine conversation during your trial. And that's why Sean was like, they can't bring that up because there's no precedence for it, but there has to be that first case, right? And I honestly believe that Health Canada will see, when we're going to watch some videos in the future now, that they are looking for a case that they can use to begin legislation to mandate drugs, mandate medications, and eradicate natural health options, because they're so incredibly dangerous. And if somebody's using that, then they're not using the life-saving medications and pharmaceuticals that are out there and available. So I just want people to recognize that what you were attempting to do wasn't about you, wasn't about Colette, wasn't about your kids. It was about literally every parent in Canada having the ability to choose medications or non-medications or natural means for their children, which, I'm a parent, and you're having to make these choices for these people, these small people that can't do it for them. And it's a big responsibility. And, if you're not doing your homework, and if you're not doing your due diligence in regards to like what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, whatever choice you make, it's a choice. But at the end of the day, like, if you don't have a choice, then what are you? We're just slaves to the system, and you've just got government controlling your children. You might as well get your government to choose what they watch, what they wear, what they eat. It's such a huge, important topic. So
that's where we're going. That's where we're going. Really, that parents are becoming just caregivers under the direction of the government, right? And that's really the battle that we're fighting here. To further clarify, they weren't necessarily looking for a case to create law off of, like, through legislation. See, because the Public Health Agency of Canada came out, I think it's about 2 decades ago now, with an article stating that they can't mandate vaccines in Canada based on the Constitution. So somehow our Constitution, or the Constitution Act, is stronger in Canada in relation to matters of vaccination than the US Constitution is, because they can mandate them down there. So and don't get me wrong, they've been bending the rules and seeing how they can bend the rules for a long time now, trying to push that. But they couldn't come up with legislation to say you have to get vaccinated or your children have to get vaccinated. So this was the law, though. It wasn't a compulsory law. It was just a law that would put people into a state of fear that would then compel them to vaccinate their children. That the law was being established through the courts, not through legislation, but now taking this very ambiguous charge of failing to provide necessities of life, which is a real hybrid type law. It does not fall into the same box as all the other criminal infractions or anything else found in the Criminal Code of Canada, because it's not about mens reis and actus reis. It's about also applying this reasonably prudent parent test that's based on societal standards. So you not only have to determine that the act happened and that there was a mind for it, but that also, is this within societal norms, which is no other real criminal infraction employs that type of test. So it's a strange law that Parliament put into place, and the judges discussed that in our cases about that. And so they were looking to set a precedent that would put parents into a state of fear that they would go and get vaccinated, not because by law that they had to, but because if something happened, that they could be in trouble with the law. So it's kind of a backwards type thing, that because we can't put legislation in to mandate vaccines, we're going to scare the heck out of you so that you go and get vaccines.
Right.
Is really what it was. And it was absolutely dirty. So just to kind of really characterize, that whole situation, that's what, yeah, you're right. That's exactly what we were trying to prevent. We were trying to prevent other parents who may not have been as well equipped, who may not have been as mentally stable to be able to handle these types of hard situations. We were trying to prevent other parents from going through the same crisis that we went through, because we were incredibly blessed. Don't get me wrong. It was really tough for us, really tough. And people are going to learn more about that with what this upcoming in the next month here, what we're going to see across Canada. You're going to have a bit of a deeper look into how our lives were during that time. But we just want to prevent other parents from not having to go there, because they might not have the financial resources to get a lawyer. They might not have the mental capacity to endure that type of situation. They might fold and help to further establish this negative precedent against parental rights in Canada. So we just want to kind of nip it in the bud. And that was really what our goal was.
That's right. And kind of going forward with our timeline here, we kind of focus a little bit more on Truehope Canada and the business, the company. Do you want to maybe introduce us a little bit in regards to like Health Canada's introduction to our incredible company?
Well, everybody knows Health Canada's introduction in October of 2000 after the first study came out, and it made national news showing that our Empower Plus was over 3 times more effective for the treatment of bipolar than antidepressants were. That was their initial introduction, but then they disappeared for a while. They kind of disappeared during the whole issue that we were having now over the death of Ezekiel. But now the Supreme Court, remember, they turn us away August 2022. I'm left thinking, what's their next battle? All of a sudden, in October of 2022, Health Canada rears their ugly head again, and they come at us and they start to heavily critique our website, which is sharing completely truthful material. A lot of it too, because we have a lot of backing over time. A lot of researchers have gotten involved in the studies of the Empower Plus and other products. So, they come and they start to critique and say, you can't have this on your website. You can't have this on your website. And so I'm consulting with our regulatory officer, if you will, within our company. And I'm saying, hey, what do we do about this? He says, well, I'm going to get back to them, and they need to particularize it a little bit more. So I'm going to ask some questions. Well, they disappear. Like, some questions are asked, well, what do you mean? Like, why does this have to be removed or whatever? They disappear for a while, but then they come back in the spring of 2023 with some more recommendations. And finally, it comes to a head by May of 2023, where we had to make some decisions. You see, the problem is they've locked down the whole natural health product industry to the degree that they control it. That if you were to oppose them, it's as simple as this. They pull your license and now you can't get it manufactured in Canada because the manufacturers are very compliant because they're under threat as well. They're very compliant to Health Canada. So if you're asking them to manufacture for you a non-licensed product, they don't want to put their neck out on the line with Health Canada and get shut down, like we've seen done over the last couple of years. We've actually seen it. And so they don't want to do that. And so, okay, you can say, well, I'll go get it manufactured in the US. Yeah, well, it doesn't get to cross the border unless it has a license. And if they pull your license, which can literally be like, that, gone. Your license is currently suspended until further notification or further review, whatever. You can't sell a product. You can't get it manufactured. The health food stores are not legally allowed to sell it, right? They'll be liable for fines. And, just down the road, now we're down the road. Last year, there was a health food store that got fined for having 17 different products out of, they probably had, I don't know, probably 500 products, maybe 6. I don't know, like it's probably between 500 and 1,000. Like there's a lot of products in that store. They had 17 of them, didn't have an NPN. They got fined, and the news made a big hoo-ha about it to scare everyone else into compliance. So that is the environment that the natural health community finds themselves in Canada right now. Health Canada has full control over it. So we had to make a decision. Do we want to protest Health Canada's ridiculous, and you'll get to see how ridiculous it is in just a moment, their ridiculous requests at the risk of losing our license and not being able to help thousands of Canadians? So we had to make a decision. So I think we made the best decision, myself, where let's pull up Truehope Canada to see how we approach their requests and whether or not, because one of the things, actually, three of the main things, and I'll get into this one last, that they made issue with was there was a video, an intro video, and in fact, it was you, Simon, that was the voice and the face of that video, talking about Empower Plus, the science behind it, what it was helping with, the anxiety, the depression, blah blah blah, and they took issue with that. And so that was the one thing that you had to pull. That was on the homepage. And then there was the testimonials. Now these are real live people that are submitting these testimonials, sharing their experiences. That's it. It's sharing real life experience. They're not being paid. They might have gotten a bottle or two of Empower Plus, maybe in some of the situations for, sharing their story to help other people. But these aren't paid actors. They're not making up stories. We're literally just going in and interviewing them, or they're submitting these testimonials, and Health Canada takes issue with that.
Yeah.
Right. The third thing was, we have 35 medical journal publications coming from independent university studies from around the world. We share those 35 medical journal publications to allow Canadians to look at this and say, hey, you know what? It was studied on ADHD. This was the findings. Maybe that worked for my ADHD. Hey, great. I'm now operating with informed consent. So now what we see here as you're scrolling down is the Canadian public does not have access to those medical journal publications, at least not from the Canadian website of Truehope. But there's probably another website or two out there that you can find those studies, but not within the jurisdiction of Canada, because Health Canada does not want you to be able to see those. So we censor it. Rather than just deleting them, removing that whole page, we censor it, and then we give an introduction as to why. So maybe show a little bit of that video there. I think that people get a good picture as to how we address this.
Censorship, a topic that's been on the tip of our tongues here in Canada over the past 3 years, and yet within Canada is nothing new. You see, over 22 years ago, groundbreaking research came out of the University of Calgary that had initially been done on the Empower Plus for the treatment of bipolar disorder. It was so groundbreaking that CTV National News picked it up, and it went all across Canada, showing that there was a new hope for sufferers of bipolar disorder.
In medical news tonight, there is new reason for optimism for sufferers of bipolar disorder, a condition that causes manic depression and a condition that affects hundreds of thousands of Canadians. According to findings of a small study presented today to the Canadian Psychiatric Association, a combination of vitamins and minerals may alleviate the disorder's debilitating symptoms.
The very next day, Health Canada phoned my father and asked him, who gave you permission to speak on national television last night about what you've been doing with these vitamins and minerals. At the same time, the Alberta government was funding $544,000 into a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial to further substantiate the effects that these vitamins and minerals would have in correcting various mental health conditions. Health Canada shut that study down, preventing the progress of science and ultimately preventing you as an individual and the general public from having access to this very meaningful information that would allow for you to make informed choices. Fortunately, the research continued across the world in various universities to the point now that there's 35 medical journal publications on the Empower Plus demonstrating its effects from over 24 studies on various mental health conditions. Conditions like anxiety and autism and Asperger's, major depression, bipolar, psychoses, helping to heal from traumatic brain injury, and also alleviating the detrimental effects of PMS.
All right. I think we get the picture there as to, really conveying how we approached Health Canada's demands. And
that's what they were, because you said recommendations in the email, but it was very clear, and they went through with a fine-tooth comb. I think they probably spent quite some time on it with their team about social media posts and those the research journals. And yeah, the fact that we were not allowed to share testimonials from the public of Canada, sharing their quite unique, beautiful, vulnerable stories with people. That's not censorship of Truehope Canada. That's censorship of the general public. And you're not living in a free democratic society when that is happening. And I'm glad that we took the position as a company is to expose Health Canada's ridiculousness in regards to trying to stop Canadians having access to our research to make informed decisions. As you say, like, this is peer-reviewed research. This is top-class quality research done with government money. This is not like Truehope Canada spending millions and millions and millions of dollars creating control trials that gives us the results we want. That's Big Pharma's job. That's not us. So yeah, it was quite remarkable when we got that email through, and then we had to take this approach. But I think this has been up there for more than a year. Yep. And I have so many people all the time messaging us, like wanting more and more access to this information and the medical journals that we do have available. We don't have available, but is out there in the ether of the internet. People are looking for it, and they see the censorship that annoys a lot of people, and it just makes them want to dig down the rabbit hole even further.
The irony of all this is that Health Canada, the whole, perspective that the general Canadian public would have is that, they're a government body that's interested in sciences in relation to human health. No. Health Canada has been at the forefront of suppressing the coming forth of breakthroughs in human sciences or human health science. Like they're at the forefront of preventing the discoveries from coming out, or if the discoveries come out, they're then there to shut it down and to push it out of the country. And that's exactly what they're doing here. But the funny part about this is that Health Canada makes those demands, and I was too soft in my language before. They were not recommendations. I was doing Health Canada's job there, I guess, by softening it, and I shouldn't be doing that. But they're demands upon us that really our license was at risk of, we were going to lose our licenses if we didn't comply to their demands. And so we come up with these videos telling basically the story of what's happening and why this stuff is no longer available to you. And then we submit it to them to say, is this okay?
They weren't expecting that.
Never heard anything back from Health Canada, but here we're literally exposing them as to what they're doing, and meeting their demands at the same time.
Yeah, that's right.
I thought it was fantastic. I'm glad that we were able to get the approval from my father to take that approach. So anyways, here we are. So What's interesting, though, is that's only the beginning of woes, if you will, when it comes to the natural health community. Because at this point in time, Health Canada's just made recommendations that, it's costing a lot of money for them to, it's not costing them anything. Let me be frank here. Sorry, let's go to simple economics and government, constructs here. It's costing the taxpayers a lot of money to run this program that Health Canada implemented in January of 2004, the NPN regulations. It's costing taxpayers a lot of money. Health Canada comes out with these recommendations. Now, these are recommendations, but they're basically solidified. They make it look like it's recommendations. Let's consult with the industry, whatever. And what they're going to do is it's going to be cost recovery. So rather than the taxpayers paying directly for Health Canada to operate this very costly and unnecessary regulatory or regulations surrounding NPNs or natural products, rather than having the taxpayers directly pay for it, they're going to make the industry pay for it. So now the taxpayers, rather than paying taxes to Health Canada, will pay an increased price for any natural products, because all the natural products are going to go up. They're going to skyrocket in price if they're even available, because a lot of the manufacturers are actually going to remove certain products because it's just not feasible. It's not cost effective to have them because it's too costly to manufacture based on all the licensing fees that they're going to have to pay Health Canada. So that's taking place in early 2023. And the whole industry is getting up in arms about it. But then it gets worse. You see, in June of 2023, they're looking to pass, the Liberal government's going to pass the budget bill, right? All right, hey, great. They need a budget. Clearly, they've demonstrated how much they need a budget, right? I mean, their policies have just driven the economy right down the tube with what they've been doing. So hopefully, this sounds like it'd be a good thing, a budget bill. Well, sandwiched into it, sections 500 to 504. They hide it. The fact that they're in the budget bill, you'd think it's about the budget. They take the natural health products and they group them into the same regulatory arena as pharmaceuticals. That now puts manufacturers at high risk of incredible draconian government overreach or powers to come in and basically bankrupt them overnight. Because, a pharmaceutical, let's say that, this is part of their business model. They introduce a medication, right? Let's say Vioxx. They introduce Vioxx. And, they're going to make hundreds of millions off of that drug. But they know that there's some issues surrounding that drug and that it's not safe for human consumption and that people are going to die. And it causes, estimated 100,000 plus deaths during the time that it's out. Oh, okay. That's not good. That's actually criminal is what that is. But no, this is just business, right? This is pharmaceutical business. That's just the name of the game. There are inherent risks with pharmaceutical medications. And so, that's too bad that 100,000 people died, right? Like the size of the city that we go and shop at. The whole city's gone, right? From in North America from the consumption of Vioxx.
Right.
So they get a fine. But the fine is only for like a few $1 million. Well, they've already put, this is part of their business model. They didn't go and spend all the hundreds of millions of dollars that they got from having that medication in circulation. They put off, a few $1 million slush fund to pay for the issues that would inevitably arise at some point in time. So they've already, okay, slap on the wrist. We made our millions, withdraw the drug, or we made our tens of millions, hundreds of millions, whatever, right? Slap on the wrist, boom, on to the next one. So they get a few $1 million fine. It doesn't bankrupt them. It's only a small percentage of the profit total from that medication. Now, apply that to the natural health community. Oh, you're not compliant with our regulations. We're giving you $1 million fine. Do you know what that would do for the average natural health manufacturer in Canada? It'd bankrupt them.
Overnight. Yeah.
Yep. Overnight. Like, you're talking their total, you're talking almost their total profits for a year or, for a whole quarter or whatever. They don't have that kind of funding. And then to have the supplement withdrawn at the same time so that they don't have additional funding coming in. It's absolutely egregious to apply the pharmaceutical model, which is corrupt because it's a slap on the wrist to the pharmaceutical companies because they're making way more money off of their patented medications, to then go and take that and apply it to the natural health community. Completely wrong, especially for products that aren't killing people. And that's where it really comes down to, is they're not killing people. Pharmaceuticals are killing people. $1 million fines, $5 million fines. That's not fit for the crime, right? That's not a fit for it at all. Like, that's a slap on the wrist. But now taking low risk products that aren't killing people and applying that same type of model, it's there to bankrupt. It's there to destroy the natural health community, which they have been attempting, like as we listed before in earlier episodes. They've been attempting to do that since the 90s. They've been looking to destroy the natural health community here in Canada. So they passed this bill in June, and the whole industry is up in arms, right? Like, this is bad. They just got, when we fought Bill C-51, I think that's probably 4 episodes ago that we talked about that. Yeah. Maybe 5. So they just, in essence, took Bill C-51 and hit it into the budget bill in June of 2023, and they got it passed. So now the whole thing is up in arms, and we're trying to fight a few battle fronts at the same time, because from one angle, they're coming at us with increased cost that's going to make some products not viable in the marketplace anymore. And whatever products are still available are not going to be economically viable for the average Canadian, because, one, their economic status has tanked due to what's happened over the last it goes beyond 4 years, but that's been accelerated over the past 4 years. They won't be able to afford these products that are now far more expensive than they previously were. And that's just whatever products are still left in the marketplace. But then also the manufacturers are facing risk of, we better make sure that we are completely compliant with Health Canada. Otherwise, we're going to be facing some really egregious fines.
That's right. And well, we're recording this right now on the 28th of May, and tomorrow is the vote for a Bill C-368, which is a private member's bill to actually take out that C-47, or 4 lines of it anyway, out of that budget bill. So by the time this comes out, which will be Thursday, the day after, if you're listening to this now, you will know whether or not that vote went through. And this is probably a good time to maybe just share very quickly. I could just share the best possible place to learn more about this and be up to date and find out what you can actionably do is to go to nhppa.org. Such a phenomenal website, phenomenal organization with wonderful people. You can get educated and take action right away. And this will be the best place to learn about updates with Sean Buckley and co, as they do live Zoom calls, do Q&As, and they don't spam you with loads of stuff. So it's the best place to get involved and sign up to their newsletter, and you'll find out all their information there. So I highly recommend visiting that website and getting involved, getting engaged, because this is more about, this is much more than just talking about natural health products. This is talking about freedoms and liberty and choice here in Canada.
Absolutely. Let's connect some dots there real quick. If people haven't already connected the dots that are the audience that's viewing this, that's Sean Buckley that's running that organization. That's the same Sean Buckley that, represented Colette and myself in 2016 and in 2014 with the whole vaccine elements to the court case, then came into the picture again in 2019 to help out Colette, and then also represented me under the appeal, Supreme Court appeal and the Alberta Court appeal thereafter in 2020 and 2021. But he's also the lawyer that represented Truehope going back to, I think he came on as a lawyer in about 2004 for us. And he was there to assist with the victory that we had in 2005 that was precedent setting. And he was also there to help alert us to the issues surrounding Bill C-51 in 2008. So he's played a significant role in relation to helping to maintain Canadians' rights to natural health products for over the past 2 decades. So he's got a lot of skin in the game. This is not just a fly-by-night individual who sees that there's a need out there and can get end up on a platform. He's got skin in the game. He's been doing this for a long time. It's where his heart is, And it's been a beautiful thing to cross paths with him numerous times in significant ways over the past 2 decades.
Yeah, that's right. Sean's a phenomenal individual. And yeah, as you say, he's actually got a very interesting story about how he actually came over from the Crown side towards the natural health products side. And we actually have a couple of episodes. He's probably been on about 4 or 5 different episodes talking about the NHPPA, talking about current affairs in regards to what's going on with Bill C-47. And he's also been on past episodes as well, talking about Health Canada's antics from decades ago, and how he actually moved from being working with the Crown against natural health products and natural health companies and supplement companies and health food stores to completely switching sides once he realized the corruption and horrific nature that he was involved in. So yeah, he's an amazing person. Yeah, big shout out to Sean, because I know he's probably going to be watching this at some point.
Awesome. I think we're coming to basically the climax of where we're at today. Basically the concluding, as to what brings us right here, right now. Mm-hmm. But it really kind of began, took life in September of 2023. Right?
Right.
Are we good to proceed with that? Is that where we're at?
Yeah, that's exactly where we should be. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, okay. So we complied with Health Canada in May of 2023, as you saw on the website. Well, what's really interesting is that here they're pushing these regulations forward, that it's going to be devastating to the natural health community, but they need a reason to do it. And to my shock, I received this video. It's shared with me via text. I received this video. It's about a 12-minute video that was on YouTube. And it alerted us to the fact that Health Canada was now resurrecting in September of 2023. They're now resurrecting a false narrative to provide a rationale as to why these regulations need to be imposed on the natural health community to protect Canadians. So I think you've got a video there to showing the actual Health Canada verbiage.
Yeah, absolutely do. Yeah, it just goes to show the weak and pathetic nature of their argument. It's really, really unreal. And if you've listened to the whole series of this Truehope Family Files, you'll recognize what utter nonsense this Health Canada doctor representative is talking here.
Represent these products. They are generally low risk, but we had a tragic 19-month-old in Alberta that died because of using natural health products instead of treatment for meningitis. Dr. Steve Findle, his emergency physician in Toronto, had a patient that was stable on medications for seizures, was taken off those medications, was put on zinc, went into status epilepticus, which is constant seizures, and died. So it does happen. And so it's really, the principle is Canadians should be able to, they're self-selecting. They're self-selecting these products. They should have the assurance that they're going into a safe marketplace when they're picking up a product. What's on the label is what's in the bottle. What the advertising claims that are being made are accurate, and that the quality of that product that's in that bottle is high quality, and it's not going to be contaminated with bacteria or other things as well. That's the principle.
Dr. Sharma, I want to go back to one of your comments that you made earlier on. You referenced some deaths from attributed to natural health products. One was the 18-month-old toddler in Alberta. I believe it's Ezekiel Stefan that you're referring to. Isn't it true that the situation is different than what you're stating? The baby didn't pass away from using or taking natural health products. The baby ultimately passed away because the parents didn't believe in going to the hospital, and they took the baby. The baby was very sick, and they tried home remedies to try and get the baby better first. And it wasn't necessarily, the death wasn't necessarily attributed to a specific natural health product. Isn't that correct?
So again, the information that we have is the same as people have in terms of of what was in the news. So my understanding was that, they were using natural health products and natural treatments instead of
Like garlic
antibiotics,
tonics.
because the child ended up having bacterial meningitis. That's
Right.
what, yeah.
Correct. But you can't specifically tie that to one specific natural health product that was mislabeled or dangerous. Is that correct?
So the point I think there was just,
All right.
this was it was in relationship to.
Yeah, unbelievable. Hey, like that's just it's just so misleading. It's unbelievable, and that's like the first example she brings up to defend all this new legislation, this new law, and she's the extent to her understanding of of Ezekiel's situation is what she saw in the media. Like it's pathetic.
Well, I'm going to say that's an easy scapegoat for her to just say, oh, it was media, when we see that Health Canada has their dirty fingerprints on our disclosure in the police files, back in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Health Canada knows a lot more about this than they're leading on to, but they're just basically saying, oh, well, that's the media. But what we do see there is, even as well-intentioned as that MP was, is that he was going off of really bad information based off of the news, because that's where he was getting his information from as well.
Yeah.
But at least he saw, even based on that false premise of what the news had reported, is that he saw that it was completely irrelevant, and he attempted to get Dr. Sharma to retract her statement on a number of occasions, and she refused. Now, what we see there as well, when Dr. Sharma says, we had a 19-month-old Alberta, toddler die from, using natural products. And then she goes into the status epileptics, the epileptic situation there as well. But then she says the principle, and she talks about what the principle of these regulations are. She's completely trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes. Those regulations have been in place since 2004. There's nothing, what she said there, that everyone would agree with. Yeah, that does need to happen. That somebody buys, a bottle of this, that what's inside of it is actually what's listed on the label. That's already in place. We've had that in place for a long time. In fact, more so than many other countries out there, that they actually look at that aspect, that it actually brings a little bit of value to our natural health products, that they know that they are going to be top quality, right?
Right.
Now, naturally, the marketplace will drive that to be the case, that based on reviews and all that type of stuff. But people can't, shouldn't have to go and get their products tested at $5,000 a pop just to make sure that, they can trust what's in it is actually what's on the label. But we already have all that stuff that she listed. All those benefits are already being done here in Canada, and we're regulated to do that.
Yep.
So it's not like she's saying these new regulations will bring that about. It's already happened. She's pulling the wool over people's eyes. It's a complete fallacy. Yes, we all agree that those principles should be in place when it comes to any packaged product in Canada, whether it be a natural health product or anything else, that it's true to form. It's what's actually is listed on the label is in the package, and nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah.
So completely deceptive. So what's interesting though about this is that they're resurrecting this false narrative out of the blue again, right? All of a sudden it becomes relevant. I see this, and you can imagine I'm ticked. But what was really beautiful about this is that we already had a remedy that ironically was coming out at almost the exact same time. The following week would be the launch or release of a docuseries called The Big Picture. And so that would be bigpicturemovie.com is where that would be found. It's a 6-part docuseries, and throughout it actually has our story with all of the evidence being laid out, threaded throughout these 6 different episodes, showing how corrupt the system is, contrasting it to what the government-run media is reporting on this case, our case, versus what the actual truth was, right? And so the timing couldn't have been better, because here you're going to resurrect this false narrative. Here's the answer to it. And so anyways, the 6-part docuseries was fairly successful. Anybody that was watching it, most people are binge watching it. They'd start at 10 o'clock at night and they'd finish up at like 3, 4 in the morning type of thing, right? It just was so compelling, the whole of it, the amount of information in there. in relation to what the big picture of corruption is that we're facing today. Well, anyways, that brings us kind of here to today, with what has made us so hectic over the last few weeks. That's made it so that we delayed this episode by a full week. And what it is that we've got a tour that's coming up, and there's been some issues that have arisen in relation to venues and all that type of stuff for movie screenings, but we are plowing through, and we are beginning a tour. We're on May 28th. As of June 1st, that tour is kicking off, a cross-country tour where we'll be starting in Victoria and working our way all the way to Ottawa, hitting up every major city in between throughout Canada to do movie airings or viewings on this condensed docuseries, where the producer took the docuseries, took our story out of it, made it into an 84-minute documentary specific to our situation, and he titled it "The People versus David and Colette Steffen." And I think we probably have the teaser available, don't we?
We sure do. I just want to bring up the website first for people. So yeah, this is the bigpicturemovie.com. And this is where you can actually watch the teaser. I'll play that in 1 second, but I think it's important to know on the left-hand side here, you're going to see all the Canadian tour dates. And as the days go through, we'll have the venues put in there. But when you see your city, you'll very soon be able to see the time and venue for those individual showings that you're going to be personally at. And I think you're going to be doing Q&As with the director. So that's just awesome. So I'm just going to play this teaser here because it's very worthwhile watching. Make sure the sound's on. Yeah. It's taking a bit of time here. Hold on. I'm going to share a different one that I know is ready to roll.
In 2016, I found myself pacing back and forth in this small little jail cell in solitary confinement, wondering how the heck did I get here? When you start putting all the pieces of the puzzle together, you see a real interesting story that emerges, an unbelievable story, really.
911 emergency, require please fire ambulance.
Hi, yes, my son's not breathing.
The RN nurse saw the child a day before 911 is called. She saw no reason to say, take the child to a doctor or go to emergency or anything like this.
She did mention the word meningitis.
He ends up rapidly declining.
They live in a rural place. And they say, well, heck, we'll just drive to the hospital.
Not far into the ride, he stopped breathing again.
We're driving down the highway really fast, and we meet up with an ambulance, and we hand Ezekiel over.
They're charged with failing to provide the necessities of life. You didn't see a lot of those prosecutions. Now you do, and Alberta is the worst. Children's Hospital in Calgary.
I get a phone call from the medical examiner's office saying that the autopsy's been performed and the report is complete, and that Ezekiel's death was vaccine preventable.
They treated him with home remedies, including mixtures of maple syrup and horseradish, instead of going to a doctor.
I mean, it was such a high-profile case. I don't even want to talk to people about it because the press has convinced them this child died of bacterial meningitis, and these parents were just so outrageous, trying to treat bacterial meningitis with maple syrup. Like, that wasn't the evidence.
I was going to commit suicide because I felt I was a horrible person from reading what the media had said about me.
The pathologist that did the autopsy, he had received a letter from the Department of Justice, basically suggested Ezekiel died of bacterial meningitis. Now, that's highly inappropriate. And why would you do that?
They were trying to create case law that would allow them to criminalize people who didn't give their children vaccines.
An expert's supposed to be impartial. He was there to have them convicted, and I had that feeling about a lot of the doctors. This is tied for the dirtiest trial I've ever had to experience in my life.
The doctor wrote at the bottom in big bold letters, "I am not involved," underline, underline. Not involved in what?
I've watched that a bunch of times. I still get a little tingle at the end there. Such a good trailer.
It is, and the movie is even better. Although I haven't seen the full updated one. He took it and added a bit more to it because there was so much evidence that was left out. There's just, well, as we see from the Truehope Family Files here, we've scratched the surface. Really, this is a comprehensive overview of really the whole story as to how we get here today with Truehope products and all that, and the opposition and the government corruption and all that. But realistically, if we were to go into detail, even with like some pertinent details that are heart-wrenching, all that, I mean, we would go for days on this.
Mm-hmm.
Like even a thick book wouldn't do it justice. So it's a pretty comprehensive documentary. It's the most comprehensive source of information at this point in time that encapsulates the truth of what took place with Ezekiel, even though there's far more details to be had, far more compelling evidence. This contains the most pertinent points all in one, because we've never put out anything on a webpage or anything. Like, you'd have to go through and find all these different articles to really put the puzzle together as to everything that's taken place. This is the best all-in-one source of the truth of what happened with Ezekiel and the criminal charges against my wife and I.
Yeah, quite phenomenal stuff. And just one more time, bigpicturemovie.com. You want to visit there, I'll leave a link to that in the show notes so you can get right there, and hopefully you can come along and watch that yourself in a city near you.
Yep. And like you said earlier, we will be there to do Q&A. I'll be talking about health freedoms in Canada, what we can do to help ensure them, to preserve them. And so it'll be not just, I hate to say entertaining. It's not really entertainment per se. It's quite empowering information all around.
Yeah.
And the current reviews on it from, a couple viewings that have taken place as kind of like a test project, is that even those who aren't really aware of corruption as to what's been going on, this is a phenomenal documentary that awakens people to know what has actually been going on here in Canada, regardless of the fact that the media has been largely covering it up, working on behalf of the government to really pull the wool over the public's eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think considering we've gone through eight episodes, we've gone through a significant amount of the past and the history of Truehope Canada and yourself and how it's all intertwined. I think that movie showing and the things happening with the NHPPA right now, these are actionable items that you can go and get involved in and learn about and watch and be a part of the future of natural health products within Canada and our freedoms and our choices to be able to make those decisions for ourselves. And you don't actually have to be a big supporter of natural health products to potentially recognize that, it's obviously a lot better to have a choice going forward. So I think, checking out the nhppa.org, bigpicturemovie.com are really good places to go to after, watching this to give yourself, I want to say, hope and understanding. And I think we've spoken about before about human nature in regards to having a battle, having obstacles to overcome. It's a very important part of becoming a human being. And even if it's going to nhppa.org, signing up for their newsletter, sending an electronic letter to your MP, these things make an incredible difference. And that's the reason that we've had second readings of legislation to go through and eradicate parts of Bill C-47, and that goes to vote tomorrow. And what we do as individuals will certainly help going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we need to always make sure that we're taking a stand, that we're standing for the truth, regardless of how hopeful or how hopeless the situation looks, we have a duty to take a stand for the truth. And also then to prepare as well for what may come, to ensure that that our families are looked after. I mean, that we have duty as parents and as caregivers, and to just make sure that we are doing the things that we ought to be doing. But first and foremost, standing for the truth, making sure that that truth is being known, and making sure that we are helping to protect and preserve that truth, because there are forces at be that seem to hate the truth and would do everything they could to cloud the truth or to completely eradicate the truth. And that's really what this whole battle has been all about. It's a battle between good and evil, and good is built upon the truth. Justice is built upon the truth. You can't have justice without truth. These are, this is a fundamental principle in our lives that we need to make sure that we are protecting and preserving and holding dearly to.
Beautiful. Well said. Wonderful final words there, David. Thank you very much. Well, that is a wrap for the Truehope Family Files and this incredible 8-part podcast series that we've been absolutely thrilled to bring to you. It's been a wonderful project that we've both been involved in. And David and his father, Tony, have been sharing Truehope's story for years. And we've had this incredible, unique opportunity to share that in significant detail, because we've had Tony on the show before speaking for an hour about the history of Truehope, but I think by the time we're done here, this could be about 16 hours worth of detailed information about Truehope and the story. And the individuals who have been watching the show knew a lot about the Truehope previously, but they had no idea about the deception and the significant details that make up the story, which is so impactful. So David, thanks so much for being with me through this series. I really appreciate your time, your bravery, your honesty. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Simon, for facilitating all this and making this happen. You're providing a tremendous blessing to many people, so thank you.
Oh, it's an absolute honor. Thank you. Well, that is it for this episode of Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. That concludes the Truehope Family Files. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Please feel free to share it out with people, starting from the first episode, of course. But we've got some amazing episodes lined up in the coming weeks. We've got Dr. Bonnie Kaplan coming on to discuss her incredible book, The Better Brain. She's featured predominantly throughout this actual series. We've spoken about Bonnie Kaplan and the research she's done in Calgary in the past. So you should definitely check that out. But that is it from us today. We'll see you soon.